So one of the core concepts of all systems of Kung Fu, including Taiji Chuan, Xini Chuan, Bagua and even Shaolin Chuan, would be the use of the area called the Kua. So in English we call this the inguinal crease or inguinal groove, and it's right here. So it looks a little bit like this, nice and slow. So it's this movement with the hip. So how do we find that? So I want you to take the knife edge of both hands and you're going to put them right here in this crease that's in between your lower abdomen and the top of your thigh, right here. So then from there, about shoulder width, a little bit wider is fine. So we're going to push straight back and we're going to bend the knees. Now you're doing something called sitting into the Kua. Now from here, what we're going to do is we're going to rotate the hip. So I'm going to pull this hip back, and at the same time I'm going to push this hip forward. So this motion is called flexion and extension of the hips. So when we flex the hip, this is flexion, and this is extension. So I'll push the hips back. Now from here, when I rotate, I'm flexing this hip, and I'm extending this hip. So what I'm doing is I'm using the muscles here, I'm pulling that back. So these are my hip flexors. I'm pulling with my hip flexors and I pull that back. At the same time, I relax my glutes, which causes my hip to extend. This causes my hip to flex right here. On the opposite side, I'm using the glutes to push the hip forward. When I use the glutes to push the hip forward, the front of the hip relaxes and opens and it stretches. So this is a yin-yang relationship. So here, let me do this. This is in the yang position because I'm actively pushing here. This is the yin perspective over here. Here I'm relaxing and I'm allowing that to stretch. The opposite is happening on this side. This is yang and this is yin. So when you put both sides together, what happens is it looks like the infinity symbol. So then you rotate from one to the other. So notice I'm not doing side to side. I'm not doing the Shakira. What I'm doing is I'm rotating along the central axis down the middle, and I'm just rotating the hips. So this is what's known as Kua-based movement. So here I'm closing the Kua. This is open Kua. Now I reverse. I close this Kua, I open this Kua. Now, this concept is, like I said, central to all systems of Kung Fu. So if I want to do, like let's say a punch, and I come from here, I'm going to turn the hips, and I'm going to punch. So this hip, the Kua over here, is now flexed. This hip is flexed. This hip is extended. So we notice the rotation that drives through. If I'm going to do something, let's say from Yang style, diagonal flying, here I store the power here. Now I slowly release it by pushing through. Squeeze the glute here, pull the hips back with the hip flexor here, and the power goes out. Bagua Zhang. I'm going to do the circle walking. So there's a corkscrew spiral force that comes up out of the ground. The hips, the Kua opens here. So here I'm closing the Kua, here I'm opening it. And the spiral force comes up through my feet, through my pelvis, and out into the hands. When I do Xini Chuan, lots of movements, dragon, cat climbs tree, right away. We see this twisting of the hips. This Kua closes, this one opens, spiral force is generated. So how do we develop the Kua power using the kettlebell? So it starts with both hips, and then we isolate it down to single hip. So we're going to take the same Kua hip position by bending backwards with our back straight. So now I'm in a flexed hip position, a flexed Kua position. And then I'm going to push through the ground, snap my hips, relax my arms, and the kettlebell goes up. Now from here, I'm going to open the Kua by squeezing my glutes. So that forces the hips up and out. and it forces the power into the kettlebell in a fajin type exercise. So the power comes out in a whip or a wave like this. So this is what it looks like. For the kettlebell, we start with 2 legs, 2 hands, bilateral force. So we snap the hips, we push through the floor, and the power goes into the kettlebell. From 2 legs, we go to 1 leg, or one arm. Kettlebell's in the same position, hips are in the same position, but now the load is greater because I used to be doing it with 2 arms. Now I'm just doing it with 1, but same thing. So when you see this, it starts to look a little bit more like martial arts movements because most of them are done with 1 arm. There's only a few that are done with 2. So then we progress it to the 3rd level. From here, we're going to do 1 leg, 1 arm. So a swing for that would look like this. So we're doing this in a front-back fashion because this is where most of the muscles on the body are. So we have to master this kind of front-back motion before we can do any kind of rotation. A lot of martial arts movements use rotation, and I showed you how to rotate from the Kua. However, if you start with that, you won't develop the muscles. So we need to develop the muscles first in an easier straight back fashion, forward and back, up and down, and then we can add rotation. So once you have this single hip, single arm power, and a forward, back, up, down motion, now we can add rotation with a rotation swing. Rotation swing, 1 leg, 1 arm, inward rotation. So this inward rotation is a sinking of the hip. I'm flexing my hip, and then I'm extending the hip, and this brings the power out into the hand. So it looks like this. So from here, kettlebell goes back, hip flexes, hip extends, flex, extend. Now from here, it's pretty easy to see applications of this: loading, storing, then release. So the release happens here. So this is the same power that I'm building with the kettlebell. This is loaded, and then it extends and the power goes out. So I hope that clears up a lot of misconceptions. This is a very basic movement, and you're going to want to do this early. If you don't, and you learn a lot of movements later without this, then you have to go back and put it in. So save yourself a few decades of training by making this important. Thank you.